Hello everyone and welcome to Tommy's Reptiles. In this video, I'll be bringing you guys along on my step-by-step process that I took to create this enclosure from BlackBoxCages. This is the shipment arriving at my house from BlackBoxCages. They sponsored me in exchange for setting up and showing off their enclosures, which actually happened to be my favorite. The enclosure on top is for my poison dart frogs, the one under that is for my snake, and this big one over here that you see is for my quince monitor. I'm finally starting to move stuff back into my reptile room, and you can see the BlackBoxCages enclosure right there on the bottom rung of my reptile shelf. First things first, I'm just going to put some light in here so I can see what I'm working with when I scape this enclosure. Okay, now that we have the lights on, I'm figuring out where we're going to put the water feature of this enclosure. The water feature is a 3-foot long, rimless fish tank, and it will be resting right on these bricks. I'm putting it in place so I can measure where the background is going to wrap around behind it. This is just pink foam board that you can get at Home Depot. I use painter's tape to mark off where I need to cut the line, and then I just snap it. The next step, I have to cut a little incision in this foam board to make space for the air vents. For a lot of the cuts, I'm just using one of these hot styrofoam cutters you can get at like Hobby Lobby. They're pretty cheap and easy to use. Scraping the back of the styrofoam board will make it easier for the silicone to adhere to it. Next, I'm just pressing some beads of silicone all over the back of the styrofoam board, and then I'll gently press it onto the wall of the enclosure. I'll be redoing this entire process until the entire background is covered in pink styrofoam. I'm using these wedges on the styrofoam to keep the styrofoam in place so it doesn't slide down. The entire background is covered in pink foam and the air vents are cut out properly. Now I'm going to spray paint the background of the fish tank with this color, Hidden Sea Glass. Next, I line the bottom of the enclosure with trash bags just to try to minimize the mess. Here's the color of the fish tank. I think it turned out pretty cool. The next step of this video, I'm going to be making some rock basking ledges for my quince monitor. This hot foam cutting tool really helps form the foam into rock-like structures. I'm using wood to hold the pieces together before I adhere them. I simply take 2 pieces of wood, shove it into the styrofoam, and then press those 2 pieces of wood into the wall of the enclosure. And that's how I start to form the ledges. Here's the placement of where I put all of the ledges. I put one main ledge on the hot side of the enclosure and one main ledge on the cool side of the enclosure. The next step is to use spray foam on the background and the ledges to really set them in place. Here's all the places that I use the spray foam, and don't worry, I'm going to be carving a lot of it away. I continued to use the hot foam cutter. I'm pretty pleased with how rocky the hot foam cutter makes the foam look. Now I'm using the rotary tool with the wire brush attachment to make the walls of the enclosure look more rock-like. Here's how it turned out. I don't know what to think. I don't know how it's going to look once I put the dry lock on it. I started to use my trusty Bowie knife to cut bigger chunks out of the rock face. This first layer is dry lock mixed with black acrylic paint. They say you should start dark and each coat should be a little lighter, but the original couple coats should be very, very dark. The first coat, in my opinion, is the most annoying because you have to make sure you get in every little crevice, every nook and cranny, make sure there's no pink styrofoam or spray foam showing. At this point, I was about 1/3 done with the first coat. And here's the first coat, totally complete. Don't worry, I'm not going to show you all the coats I do. I ended up doing 5 coats and 1 touch-up coat. This is the 4th coat, and it looks a little more gray, less black, and a little more rock-like, but there's still some work that needs to be done. Now I'm just stirring up the final coat of paint, which is pretty much just straight up gray dry lock. This is where I start detailing the rocks to make them look like actual rocks and not just pieces of foam. The idea is to take a lighter coat of paint and just lightly brush it over the surface of the background. You actually don't want to get the paint in all the nooks and crannies. You want to leave those dark to look like cracks and crevices. This is what I mean, leaving the light paint on the outside and leaving the cracks and crevices dark. It's been a couple days, now let's take a look at how that paint job turned out. We have to smash these pavers, but you'll see why in a little bit. It's finally time to properly light this enclosure. This enclosure will require a UVB, a heat light, and an LED strip light. This 4-foot LED light is from Walter's last enclosure, and we'll be using it in this enclosure. But first, let's remove the painter's tape. Now I'm drilling pilot holes in the ceiling of the enclosure so I can screw in the screws to mount the light. Let there be light. Now I'm drilling a hole in the side of the enclosure so the plug for the light can fit through. Now let's tape that wire to the top of the enclosure. And we'll also hide this thing with some tape. I had to use a drill bit to drill a hole in the side of the enclosure in order to slide the air tube through it. It was time to just vacuum out a little more debris. I couldn't help myself, I had to get this sign and hang it up in the enclosure, and I just used some Velcro to do it. The next step was to put the fish tank back into the enclosure. Perfect fit. Then I started adding the substrate, starting with some cocoa fiber. Next was some organic topsoil. And I mixed it all up. Here is where those smashed pavers come into play. I'll be using rocks to separate the substrate from the water feature. So when my Quince monitor walks over the rocks, it will drag the substrate off so he doesn't get the water all dirty. And that's why I'll be using gravel on the complete left side of the enclosure. I'll be using more of those smashed pavers to block and cover the bottom side of the fish tank. I'll be topping off the rest of the right-hand side of the enclosure with cypress mulch. I took his branches from his old enclosure and added them to his new enclosure. It's time to hide and disguise the air vents. What better way than to use some plants? Now it's time to plug and play with the last of the plants that I got at Hobby Lobby for half price. I got 3 of these fern stems and I ended up moving them down lower, as you'll see right here. Let's hook up the filter to the fish tank and fill it up with water. I'm just going to use a simple sponge filter and I'm going to hide it eventually, but for now I'm just going to leave it out in the open and see how Walter does with it. The enclosure is ready for Walter, so there's one thing left to do, and that's get Walter inside the enclosure. I'm using this bamboo as a ramp to coax Walter right inside his new home. I'm going to use food to coax Walter out of his old enclosure, down the hall, right up the ramp into his new enclosure. When he sees these tongs, he knows it's feeding time. The plan didn't work completely, but I just picked him up and kind of pushed him towards his new enclosure. You can notice that a little bit of the foam is showing, that little pink spot on the top right, but don't worry, I'm going to glue some cork bark right to that. At this point though, I don't really care, I'm just happy that Walter is in his new enclosure and he seems to enjoy it. He's growing so fast though, I might have to build him a large walk-in enclosure outside this summer. And if that's the case, I'll end up converting this enclosure for my Brazilian rainbow boa. But I'll let Walter, my Quince monitor, enjoy this enclosure for quite some time before that happens. Now that Walter just finished his meal, I'm going to let him explore his new home. It's so fun for me to watch Walter use his forked tongue, sniff around, and just explore. Usually the first few weeks of moving a monitor can be pretty stressful for the monitor because they have no idea where they're at. But you can see Walter is flicking his tongue everywhere and seems pretty comfortable. He hasn't had a fish tank in about 8 months, so I hope he uses it. And it looks like he is. In his last enclosure with the fish tank, he'd be in the fish tank probably about 75% of the day. Well, there you have it, folks. The complete Quince monitor build thanks to BlackBoxCages. If you're interested in doing a similar build, go check out BlackBoxCages. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video, and thank you for watching.